You won't believe what happened when Karen's husband, a police officer, showed up at my house over something as simple as cutting the grass. It all started when my son, just trying to help out around the yard, decided to mow the lawn on a Saturday afternoon. Little did we know, it would spark a full-blown confrontation. Karen, who lives a few houses down, suddenly came rushing over, furious. She claimed my son was trespassing and accused him of all kinds of ridiculous things. But it didn't stop there. She went even further, calling her husband, the cop, to come handle the situation. As if that wasn't enough, she demanded that he arrest my son, who's only 15, over nothing more than cutting the grass. And when her husband arrived, he seemed ready to take her side without even listening to what was really going on. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to stay calm, but things were escalating fast, and before I knew it, Karen was demanding that my son be cuffed. What happens next? Is this whole thing going to turn into a serious legal mess, or will we be able to de-escalate before things get out of hand? You're not going to want to miss how this one ends. Stay tuned to find out what happened when Karen's cop husband got involved. At first, I tried to reason with Karen, thinking maybe this was just a misunderstanding, but she wasn't having it. She started yelling at my son, accusing him of lurking around her property and making up stories about how he'd been eying her house for days. This was totally out of the blue, and none of it made any sense. My son, who's usually the quiet one, just stood there, confused and a little scared. He didn't even know Karen, let alone do anything to upset her. I tried to step in, explaining that my son was simply doing a chore for me, something we do every weekend. But Karen wouldn't listen. She kept calling him a troublemaker. And that's when she decided to call her husband. You could see the tension in her eyes. She was so worked up that I honestly thought she might lose it completely. A few minutes later, Karen's husband showed up. He was in full uniform, like he was on duty, and immediately started questioning my son. It felt like he was treating him like a criminal, despite the fact that there was no crime. I couldn't believe it. This was a situation that could have been handled with a simple conversation, but instead, it was spiraling into something much bigger. Karen was right there, egging him on, and the whole thing was getting way out of hand. What's going to happen next? The tension was unbearable. As soon as Karen's husband stepped onto the scene, things took an even more unsettling turn. He didn't even look at me or try to understand what was really going on. His focus was entirely on my son, and it was like he was just waiting for a reason to make an arrest. He stood there, arms crossed, looking over my son like he was guilty of something, while Karen stood by, nodding along with every accusation she made. My son was getting visibly more anxious, barely saying a word. I knew he was trying to stay calm, but who wouldn't feel intimidated with a cop standing there, acting like they'd done something wrong? Karen was relentless, saying things like, "He's been stalking my house, and he doesn't belong on my property." It felt like we were trapped in this twisted version of a neighborhood dispute, where one person's word could cause serious trouble for someone else. I tried to intervene again, asking her husband to hear me out, but he just cut me off. He seemed completely aligned with Karen, barely looking in my direction. It was starting to dawn on me that this wasn't just about cutting the grass anymore. This was about something deeper, something more personal between Karen and me that I didn't even understand yet. Why was she so insistent on making this a bigger issue? Was there something more going on? The frustration in my chest was building, and I knew we couldn't let this spiral any further, but it was hard to see a way out. The tension in the air was thick. My son was standing there, barely moving, as Karen's husband continued to question him like he was some sort of criminal. The way he looked at him, the tone in his voice, it felt like he was trying to make a case out of nothing. I could see my son's face turning red from the pressure, his hands clenched at his sides. It was clear he was starting to panic, and honestly, I could feel my own frustration rising. How had we gotten here? How had something so simple turned into a nightmare? Karen kept pushing. "Just cuff him already," she said, almost too calmly, like she had everything figured out. It was like she didn't even care about the truth, It was as if she was determined to make sure this became a police matter, even though there was absolutely no reason for it. Every word out of her mouth felt like it was escalating the situation further, pushing us closer to a breaking point. I tried to stay composed, but my anger was boiling over. How could a simple misunderstanding have gotten this far? I didn't understand why Karen was being so aggressive, and her husband was feeding into it, refusing to listen to reason. I finally snapped, raising my voice, asking him why he wasn't even willing to hear both sides. That's when Karen's husband, his eyes cold and unmoving, made a decision that would change everything. He took a step toward my son. The air felt heavy, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. What was about to happen? Just as I braced myself for the worst, something unexpected happened. A voice from behind us interrupted the tense standoff. It was another neighbor, someone I barely knew, but had seen around a few times. She was walking toward us, her face flushed with frustration. "What is going on here?" she asked, looking from Karen to her husband, then to my son and me. Karen immediately snapped at her, like she wasn't even human. "Stay out of this. This is none of your business." But the neighbor wasn't backing down. She pointed at Karen and said, "I've been watching this whole thing. Your son isn't even in the wrong. You're the one making this into something it isn't." It was a moment of clarity that we all needed, but it also added a whole new layer to the situation. Suddenly, Karen was the one on the defensive. Her usual confidence faltered just for a moment as she realized someone else had seen her actions for what they really were. But that only seemed to make her more enraged. She turned to her husband, now pleading with him to do something, anything, to get my son in trouble. I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning. But before I could say anything to the neighbor or try to reason with Karen, another twist hit. A car pulled up in front of our house. The last thing I expected was for it to be a second cop car, and even less expected was the officer who stepped out of it. A familiar face, someone I never thought would be involved in this mess. The officer who stepped out of the car was someone I never expected to see again. Detective Harris, a friend of mine from years ago. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I recognized him immediately. As soon as he saw me, his face tightened, and his eyes quickly scanned the scene. Karen immediately tried to explain, rushing toward him with her usual drama, spitting out her version of what had happened. But Harris didn't even let her finish. "Karen, I think you've said enough," he said, his voice calm but firm. He then turned to me, and I could tell he was trying to stay neutral, but there was a slight knowing look in his eyes. He had heard my side of the story before. With one glance at my son, who was still standing frozen by the yard, his expression softened. "Why don't we all just take a step back and figure out what's really going on here?" Harris suggested. He motioned for the other cop, who had been hovering near Karen's husband, to step aside. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Finally, someone was taking control. Karen looked furious, but her grip on the situation was slipping fast. Harris approached her husband, speaking quietly, and I could see the tension in the air. After a tense exchange, Harris turned back to me and my son. "There's no reason for any charges. This is a misunderstanding, and it should never have escalated this far," he said firmly. Just when I thought everything was about to settle, Karen did the unthinkable. She spun on her heels, glaring at us one last time. "You won this round," she hissed. But as she stormed off, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time we'd be dealing with her. Then, as I turned back to my son, I saw a small piece of paper on the ground, half hidden under the grass. Curiosity hit me as I picked it up, and what I found on it sent a chill down my spine. A note with one cryptic line. Asterisk, "This isn't over." Asterisk, what did it mean? And what was Karen planning next? The air was thick with unanswered questions. This was far from over. As I stood there, holding the note in my hand, a cold realization settled in. Karen's "this isn't over" comment wasn't just an empty threat, it was a warning. But for now, I was grateful that the situation had calmed down, and my son was finally able to breathe again. Detective Harris stayed with us for a while longer, making sure everything was sorted out. He reassured me that there wouldn't be any legal action, and Karen's false claims were not going to go any further. The other cop left, and the street slowly returned to its usual quiet. A few days passed without incident, and Karen seemed to back off, but the note haunted me. I kept thinking about what she might be planning next. Maybe it was just an empty threat, or maybe there was something deeper going on with her. But for now, I decided to focus on my family. We were safe, and that's what mattered most. The whole experience was a stark reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control, even over something as small as cutting the grass. It's easy to underestimate the impact of one person's actions, but this ordeal made me realize that sometimes it only takes one person to escalate things to the breaking point. I just hope Karen stays out of our lives for good, but I can't help but wonder, will she? Only time will tell.